Alright, this is my week 3 video submission, and I'm going to be going over how early colonization of Africa is still having an effect on modern African soccer today. The main objectives I'm going to be discussing is the early colonization of Africa and the introduction of soccer to Africa by Europe, control of early African soccer leagues by Europe, ad hoc academies that export talent from Africa into European leagues, and electronic colonialism, which is shifting the attention of African citizens away from African clubs and towards mostly the Premier League, but also other European leagues. So I want to start off by talking about this event called the Scramble for Africa, in which European nations colonized Africa in such a fast manner, in which by 1913, almost every single modern African nation had been under European control, except for Ethiopia and Liberia, which you can see by observing this map. And this was an important event for the globalization of soccer because it was the first time that soccer had been spread to Africa during this time of colonization. It's also important to observe which part of Africa was under control by a specific European nation because it highlights important events of soccer's history in Africa. For example, the first ever game of soccer to take place in Africa was in South Africa while under British control. Also, some of the earliest established African clubs were developed under French rule in West Africa. So now we can go into how and why soccer was first introduced to Africa. It was first introduced by missionaries at missionary schools like this one below. And at first it was used more as a tool to instill European values and draw the African people together, rather than a sport that was just for fun. Once African nations started to create their own football clubs, Europeans saw it as a sign of resistance to their colonialism, and they tried to keep it suppressed while it was happening. Zanzibar was one of the first African nations to start creating its own football clubs, and the Europeans that occupied the country wanted to keep that under their own regulation. And they did that by making a rule that every single referee to officiate a game must be of European descent. And the rationale behind this rule was that they didn't believe that the Africans could officiate a game or uphold the rules properly. The Europeans also owned most of the stadiums and soccer pitches throughout the continent at this point, which made it very difficult for African clubs to expand. So everything we've gone over so far was during a period known as New Imperialism, in which European countries were looking for new land to take over for their own country. And now we're entering a new concept known as Neo Colonialism, in which a country no longer has control over a certain area of land, but still has influence over the economy or people. One of the forms of neocolonialism that still occur today are the ad hoc academies throughout Africa that recruit African football players and then export them to European nations once they acquire the proper talents. This really draws away the attention of African citizens from their own football leagues because it leaves them without any talent, and any stars that do arise are simply exported away to the European leagues. One of the most noteworthy instances of athletes arising from ad hoc academies are the two brothers below, which play for Man City and Liverpool. These two brothers named Kolo and Yaya Toure are from the Ivory Coast and were recruited by the Mimo Sifcom Academy. And as soon as they showed enough talent at the academy, they were able to leave Africa and be able to play in the Premier League. This practice of exporting players to other nations is one of the major contributing factors to a term coined by Professor Oleji known as electronic colonialism. This term basically describes how most of the African population is much more involved in Premier League soccer through televisions and internet streams over real soccer matches that they can view in their home countries. This can be seen in the image below, in which a top-tier match in Senegal is sparsely populated by any of the local population. However, if you observe the diagram, you can notice that Africa accounts for 22.6% of the Premier League's global audience, which shows that Africans would much rather watch a Premier League on the television than see an actual match in real life. And this can be attributed to the fact that all the players that Africans want to see from their individual countries have left and are playing in European leagues. And this is also a form of neocolonialism because it's taking a major economic advantage away from many of the clubs in Africa that would be a beneficiary to the talent of these players that are being sent away. In conclusion, it's very interesting to see how the first colonization of Europe involved taking away natural resources away from the land. And now in this second wave of neocolonialism, it's taking talent away from these African clubs who could use the economic advantage in order to increase their crowd sizes and support from their own home nations.